That night started like any other lie, to calm, to rehearsed. Emily was wearing that red dress I'd bought her 2 anniversaries ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. I watched her twirl in front of the mirror, pretending it was just another girl's dinner. Her perfume filled the room, the same one she used to wear on our dates when everything still felt real. The same one I'd smelled on that motel scarf in Jack's photos. She looked radiant, but I'd stopped seeing beauty in her. Now, all I saw were patterns. Her tells, her practice gestures, her half-second pauses when she tried to think of the next lie. She kissed me on the cheek before leaving, and I smiled back like a man who didn't already know everything. But that night wasn't about following her again. No, I wanted her to come home. I wanted to see how she'd carry the weight of what I had set in motion. Earlier that afternoon, I'd sent an anonymous email to Daniel's wife, with one attachment, a single photo of Emily and Daniel in that cabin. Their faces half-lit by sunset, holding hands across a cheap bottle of wine. I didn't need to say anything else. The timestamp, the intimacy, the expression, they told the story for me. Around 10 p.m., Emily came home. Her smile was wide, but her eyes were distant. I asked, casually, "How was dinner?" "Great," she said too quickly. "We talked about a new client. Big opportunity." Her voice trembled just enough for me to notice. I nodded, stood up, and walked into the kitchen. I poured 2 glasses of wine and handed her one. She hesitated before taking it. That hesitation told me everything. She knew something was wrong. She could feel it. We sat there, drinking in silence. The ticking clock above the stove was the only sound. Then her phone buzzed. I watched her hand freeze halfway to the table. She glanced at the screen. The color drained from her face. Her breathing changed. She whispered, "Oh my God." I didn't ask what it was. I didn't need to. Daniel's wife had replied. I could see it written all over her. She got up suddenly, walking toward the hallway, muttering something about needing air. I stayed seated. I wanted her to feel that I wasn't chasing her anymore. That I didn't need to. That silence, that empty space between us, was heavier than any scream. I could hear her pacing in the living room, whispering frantically into her phone. No, I don't know how she found it. No, I didn't tell him anything. I swear. She stopped when she realized her voice had carried too far. I stood at the edge of the kitchen, watching her reflection in the window. "Who are you talking to, Emily?" She turned sharply, her eyes wide. "It's just work, John. Don't start this again." Her voice cracked halfway through my name. "Work." I stepped closer. "Then why did your client send your husband a picture from the cabin you said didn't exist?" She froze, completely. The blood seemed to drain from her skin. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Then, the tears started, real ones. Not the kind that soften hearts, the kind that come from panic. "I can explain," she whispered. I smiled, not kindly. "I'm sure you can. You've had plenty of practice." I left her there, trembling, while I went to my study. I opened the drawer, pulled out the folder, thick, organized, devastating. Everything from Jack's investigation, every lie mapped, every receipt cataloged. I set it on the table where she could see it when she came in. When she finally did, she looked like someone who'd seen a ghost. Her voice was barely audible. "You've been spying on me." I looked up slowly. "No, Emily, I've been watching the truth." She stepped back like the words were a blade. "You planned this," she said. "You wanted to hurt me." I shook my head. "No, you did that yourself." I just stopped pretending it didn't matter. For a long time, we stood there, to strangers in the ruins of what used to be a marriage. No yelling, no slammed doors, just the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on us. Finally, she whispered, "What are you going to do?" I didn't answer. I just handed her the folder. She opened it with shaking hands, saw the photos, the receipts, the messages, the reports, and then looked at me as if I'd just killed someone. And maybe I had, not her body, but everything she thought she was. When she tried to speak, I turned and walked away, leaving her to drown in her own silence. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat outside on the porch until sunrise, watching the light crawl across the yard, wondering whether revenge always feels this empty. But then, my phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "You don't know the whole story. Meet me tomorrow, alone." It was Daniel's wife, and just like that, the game changed again. I used to think that real heartbreak happened in an instant, like a knife twisting deep inside your chest. But now I know, it's slower. It creeps up on you, bit by bit, until one day you wake up and realize your whole world was a lie. My name's Michael. I'm 36, a contractor from Austin, Texas. I've been married to my wife, Emily, for 8 years. We had what most people would call a perfect life, a cozy house, 2 golden retrievers, a little vegetable garden she loved. People at church called us the golden couple, but golden things, they tarnish fast when the light hits them, right? It started one Tuesday night. Just like any other. Emily said she was working late, something about a client presentation. I didn't think much of it until I got a text from her number. Except it wasn't meant for me. At first, I thought I read it wrong. I can't stop thinking about last night. I miss you already. I stared at the screen, frozen. The message had a little heart emoji at the end. My stomach twisted. I typed, "Who is this?" But before I could hit send, the message disappeared, deleted. She must have realized her mistake. I sat there for an hour, staring at the empty chat, my fingers trembling. My mind started connecting dots I didn't want to see. The late nights, the sudden change in perfume. The way she guarded her phone like a secret vault when she came home that night. Smiling like nothing happened. I could barely look at her. She kissed me on the cheek and said, "You're quiet tonight." Quiet. If only she knew what was boiling beneath that silence. I didn't confront her. Not yet. No, I needed to be sure. I needed proof. That's when I decided to start digging. The next morning, I drove her car to work instead of mine. She left it unlocked. Mistake number 1. Inside the glove compartment, under a stack of old receipts, I found a second phone. A cheap burner. And when I turned it on, my heart nearly stopped. Dozens of messages, pictures, voice notes. Him, her. She called him my real love. My hands went cold. I remember staring at the screen, hearing my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Every "I love you" felt like a dagger. Every photo a slap across the face. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, realizing that my life, my marriage, my love, was over. But I wasn't going to let her walk away clean. No, she'd built a web of lies around me, and I was going to burn every thread of it. That night, as she slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I planned everything, slowly, quietly, because revenge is best served while they still think they've won. The first thing I learned was how loud silence can be. After I found the burner phone, I started moving like a man who already knows the war has begun. But outwardly I kept the quiet husband act, the small gestures, the jokes, the easy smile. I fed her breakfast, I kissed her goodbye, I pretended I didn't know. Inside, everything was different. Inside, I was collecting evidence like a man gathering kindling for a fire. I didn't want reckless anger. I wanted certainty. I didn't want accusations that could be shrugged off with a tear and a rehearsed apology. I wanted proof that could stand up under light. So I started slow. First, I cataloged what I already had, screenshots of the deleted message. I'd recovered it with a data tool. The second phone, a handful of photos that showed more than an occasional flirt. Every file went into a folder on an encrypted drive. I labeled them by date, by sender, by location. Organization felt like control. Control felt like survival. Next, I called someone I'd never thought I'd call, a private investigator. Jack wasn't glamorous. He smelled of coffee and old paper, and he moved with the efficiency of someone who'd watched too many marriages break and learned to keep his mouth shut. I told him what I had and what I needed: discreet documentation, timestamps, and confirmation. Nothing theatrical. No ambushes, no scenes that might blow up my life before I was ready. Jack worked in the kind of gray that sits just outside the law, tailing cars, photographing meetings from a distance, pulling public reservation logs. His photos were practical and precise, hands on a thigh in the corner of a restaurant, to wine glasses left on a table long after other diners had left, a hotel registration with a name that wasn't mine. He found patterns I had missed because grief keeps you sloppy. I had seen a kiss. Jack showed me the itinerary. Watching those images felt physical. I would sit at my kitchen table at 2 in the morning and spread the prints like a tarot reader trying to understand fate. The coffee went cold. My hands stopped shaking. Rational steps replaced the burning urge to yell, to break things, to demand an apology I knew I would not accept. I began to record details in a little black notebook: dates, times, plate numbers. The smell of the cologne she wore the night after she'd promised me she was at a team dinner. Notes became a timeline that started to look less like chance and more like choreography. I saw where the lies fit together. The night she worked late conveniently matched Daniel's out-of-town trips. A string of unexplained charges lined up with nights I'd been left alone on the couch, a movie half-watched and cold, but evidence wasn't enough. People believe stories, not files. I needed witnesses. I needed edges, like someone testing the temperature of water before they jump in. So I fed small, casual comments into conversations with mutual friends. It was surgical, half-truths, and rhetorical questions that made others pause and look. Funny, Laura's been traveling so much lately, I'd say, as if airily considering it. People who had seen little things began to stitch them together. Hearsay turned into suspicion. Legal preparation came next. I met an attorney for a consultation. Nothing dramatic, purely practical. I asked what kinds of documents hold up in court, how to protect assets, how to preserve digital evidence so it couldn't be dismissed. The lawyer recommended steps: notarized copies, verified timestamps, retaining originals in a secure place. That last detail spared me something I'd later be grateful for. When you're dismantling a life, you don't want your own hands to be the ones that throw the rope away. There were nights I wanted confrontation. I pictured dragging her into the kitchen, slamming the photos on the table, watching the performance crumble. But I didn't want theatrics. The person who'd broken me had given me the option to choose what kind of man I would become. I chose patience. I chose a patient, precise dismantling. Between the investigation and the legal prep, I started to map scenarios. If she confessed and begged, I would refuse quick forgiveness. If she lied, I would let the evidence speak where words failed. If she tried to make me the villain, I would have a script, notarized files, recorded timestamps, witnesses ready to speak. I wasn't building a trap to humiliate. I was building an argument the world could not ignore. There were small humiliations that came with the work. I learned she had lied about a charity gala that coincided with a weekend in a cabin with Daniel. I read texts where they planned vacations I had thought we'd take together. I learned the tone of the voice she used when she wanted to promise something she didn't plan to keep, and I learned to sleep again. Not because the pain vanished, but because action steadied me. When I finally confronted the reality, not with rage, but with files and facts, the edges of my grief sharpened into something like purpose. The house felt different. The silence between us now carried a kind of electricity. She did not know which moves I had already made. She thought I still believed in us. So I carried on with the mask of normalcy. I kissed her, asked about her day, agreed to dinner plans. I watched her eyes whenever the phone buzzed. I waited until everything lined up in cold, undeniable proof. What I was building was not revenge for spectacle. It was a dismantling of the illusion she had lived in. I wanted the truth to be the kind of thing that could not be laughed off at a brunch table or brushed away with a confession during a fight. I wanted consequences that matched the betrayal, and as week turned into month, the pile of evidence grew. There was comfort in the accumulation. Each document felt like a small reclaimed piece of my life. The plan was forming, the threads were in my hands, and for the first time since that text appeared, I believed I could choose how this ended. I learned early that truth is a brittle thing. It shatters easily if you hit it with enough force, but it also takes time to crack from the inside. After Jack's reports and the neat, damning stacks of printouts on my kitchen table, I could have stormed the house and thrown everything at her. Instead, I chose to test the edges, to see how wide the fracture ran, and who else would fall in when the light hit it. The first test was small and almost mean in its modesty. I left my phone unlocked on the couch, the screen facing up with a fake draft message I pretended to be composing. It wasn't about infidelity. It was about money, a nudge that looked like worrying over a business account. When she sat next to me and her thumb hovered over the screen, I watched her flinch like a pulled cord. She pretended to laugh at the joke, but later I found her tapping at messages I hadn't seen before, nervous and hurried. Next, I started to lean into social friction. People are creatures of reputation. All it takes is a rumor in the right house, and they start to check their mirrors. I called a mutual friend, someone who had always been careful about gossip, and confided, softly, in tantalizing half-truths, "You know how Emily works late sometimes. Funny how often that lines up with Daniel's trips. I didn't invent anything. I only arranged the facts like a composer arranging notes." The friend asked no questions the first time. But when I mentioned it again in a different living room, with a different person listening. The idea grew teeth. I also began shadowing her in quiet ways Jack hadn't managed to justify on paper. Not stalking. I hate that word for myself, but observation. I'd show a little curiosity at the office, linger by the parking lot when I had the excuse, pick up coffee at a corner she passed, and stand in the distance to watch if she waved back. People who cheat move with a confidence that borders on arrogance. They assume their choreography is invisible. It isn't. They just believe everyone is too sleepy to notice. I wasn't sleepy. Daniel slipped too. Every play has moments when the actor forgets his lines. Daniel forgot his composure. One engineered small annoyances, deliberate coincidences that put him in awkward positions. A casual email copy to a colleague about business lunch when I knew the lunch was personal. A mention, loud enough in the right room, about a mutual client who had seen unusual invoice items. I didn't blast accusations. I planted doubts where Daniel's ego would feel compelled to act. He responded by tightening his circle, sending terse messages, and rescheduling weekend trips. That panic made him careless. I seeded a confidant in Emily's world, too. Not a liar, not a blackmailer, a human who'd already grown suspicious for other reasons. I let this person overhear a half-phrase, a joke about weekends away, that sounded like more than it was. People hear what they want when the framing is convenient. Before long, that confidant texted me, hesitant and almost apologetic, with a single line. Do you know about Daniel? Something isn't right. A small victory. Confirmation that the web was pricking, but the real test was the trap I built at home. I created a tiny scenario that would force her to choose honesty or instinctive concealment. I told her I was thinking of organizing a weekend with friends, a casual retreat to a cabin we used to love. Maybe this weekend. I said, casual as a weather report. Her mouth tightened for a breath. She said yes, too quickly. Then, that afternoon, I slid a printed photo on the dining table where she would see it, a picture Jack had captured of her and Daniel, wrapped in blankets at a lake cabin, a cheap takeout box, and two wine glasses visible on the picnic table. I didn't confront. I didn't point. I left the image and walked out of the room. She found the photo and turned the color of old paper. Her first instinct was to reach for the phone, to delete, to hide, to text a denial. I watched her hand shake, and, for the first time since this began, I saw real fear. Not the genteel panic of a momentary exposure, but the cold recognition that the scaffolding she'd built could be dismantled. That's when she really began to misstep. People under pressure forget that the world has edges. They try to slip through the seams, to force their way into small lies that will pass unnoticed. She started tightening her own knots, leaving receipts in the wrong bag, calling under a different name in hurried tones, slipping into bathroom stalls to answer texts like a girl in the middle of a schoolyard betrayal. The more she worked to hide, the more visible her hiding became. On my end, I kept the folders updated, photos labeled, timestamps printed and notarized when necessary, interviews scheduled with quiet, reliable witnesses willing to speak in measured tones. I never let the evidence look like a vendetta. It had to be a ledger of truths. The moment the ledger looked tidy enough to hand to someone who cared about facts more than drama, the world would have to respond. At night, after she fell asleep and the house breathed in slow, contented sighs, I would arrange the next small stone in the pattern. It felt like playing with a live animal. You prod to see the reaction, not to hurt it at first, but to understand its limits. I wasn't cruel for cruelty's sake. I was calibrating an instrument of consequence. The tests weren't about watching her fall. They were about seeing where she had dug foundations, who would mix cement with her, and which windows would yield when the wind finally rose. The edges were showing, and they were sharp. The next step would not be a test. It would be a choice. I stared at that message for a long time. You don't know the whole story. Meet me tomorrow, alone. The words pulsed on my screen like a warning. My first instinct was suspicion. Maybe it was a trap. Maybe she was trying to shift the blame. Maybe Emily or Daniel had set this up to corner me. But there was something in the phrasing. Not anger, not accusation. It sounded tired. Like someone who'd already lost everything and had nothing left but the truth. By morning, curiosity had replaced doubt. Revenge has a strange way of evolving. Once you burn through rage, what's left is a hunger for clarity. I wanted to know every detail. Who had lied first? Who had pulled whom into the fire? Who had started this war I'd been fighting in the dark? I met her at a small cafe on the east side of town, one of those quiet places with chipped mugs and the smell of burnt espresso. She was already there when I arrived, sitting by the window, sunglasses hiding eyes that had clearly seen too much. "John?" she asked when I approached. Her voice was low, calm, but the kind of calm that only comes after a storm. I nodded and sat across from her. She didn't waste time. "You think your wife and my husband just happened?" I said nothing. "They've been doing this for years," she continued, her hands gripping the cup like it was holding her together. "But it didn't start as love. It started as a deal. That made me look up. A deal," she nodded. "Daniel was in trouble at work, internal investigation, possible fraud, company money disappearing. Emily was his accountant. He needed someone to make numbers disappear. She needed money. They started covering for each other, and then—" She paused, eyes flicking toward the window. "Then they decided to make it more than business. The air between us thickened. I could feel my heartbeat slow, like my body was trying to process every word before my mind exploded. So she helped him steal," I said flatly. "She helped him survive," the woman replied. "At least, that's what she told herself. I tried to stop Daniel when I found out, but he said he had it under control. He said your wife was the only one who could make the numbers work." Her tone shifted, sharper now. "But I know your type, John. You wouldn't just let this go, would you?" I smiled faintly. "You're right. I don't believe in letting things go. I believe in balance." She leaned forward. "Good. Because there's something else you need to see." She slid a flash drive across the table. Small, silver, unassuming. Everything Daniel's been hiding. Bank transfers, private emails, even surveillance footage. "You'll see what they've both done. To us, to their jobs, to themselves." I didn't touch it at first. "Why are you giving this to me?" Her lips tightened. "Because I'm done being collateral damage. You want revenge. Fine, just don't forget who started this." I picked up the flash drive. It felt heavier than it should have. Like it contained more than data. Maybe an ending. Maybe a beginning. Before I could ask more, she stood up, adjusted her coat, and walked out. No goodbyes, no glance back, just a ghost leaving behind the last piece of a puzzle I didn't know I needed. That night, I plugged the flash drive into my computer. My heart was pounding, but not from fear, from that electric hum of purpose. File after file unfolded before me, spreadsheets, messages, confidential reports, then one video file, dated 3 weeks ago. I clicked it open. The footage was grainy, security camera from an office parking lot. Daniel stood by his car, pacing. Emily walked up to him, clearly angry. Their voices were muffled, but the body language said enough. She shoved him. He grabbed her arm, yanked her closer, hissed something in her ear that made her step back. Then he got in his car and drove away, leaving her standing alone under the flickering light. I replayed it twice. Something about her reaction, fear, not guilt. It didn't add up. If she was his accomplice, why did she look terrified of him? I scrolled deeper into the files. Another folder labeled insurance. Inside, scanned documents, Daniel's name, Emily's signature. A shared account worth hundreds of thousands, but the beneficiary wasn't her. It was him. My stomach dropped. Daniel wasn't protecting her. He was setting her up. She thought she was in control. She wasn't. And that's when I realized revenge wasn't something I was chasing anymore. It was something I'd inherited. There were more pieces to fall, and I was done waiting for them to fall on their own. Sleep didn't come that night. The glow of the laptop screen burned into my eyes until morning. Every folder, every document looping through my mind like a film reel I couldn't pause. I kept replaying that video, Emily's expression when Daniel grabbed her arm. Fear, pure and raw. Not guilt, not love. Fear. It didn't make sense anymore. The story I had built, the one that kept me going through every sleepless night and quiet act of revenge, started to crack. I thought I knew who the villain was. I thought the picture was complete. But that flash drive, it tore through the illusion like a bullet through glass. By sunrise, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't done. I just needed to change the target. I called Jack, my private investigator, the same man who'd been quietly watching Emily and Daniel for months. His voice was groggy when he picked up. "John, it's 6 a.m. You all right? I need to meet. Today. What's going on?" "Something's off," I said. "I think I've been looking at the wrong enemy." He met me at a diner off the highway, the kind of place where the coffee tastes like ash and nobody asks questions. I handed him the flash drive. He didn't even blink. "Where'd you get this?" "Daniel's wife." He gave a low whistle. "Dangerous kind of gift." Jack plugged it into his laptop right there in the booth, scanning through the files, muttering under his breath. "Jesus, this is big," he said after a while. "This isn't just an affair. These are corporate accounts, offshore transfers, falsified invoices. Your wife's name is all over this, but look here." He tapped the screen. "These transactions trace back to Daniel's personal shell company. He's using her credentials." My chest tightened. "So he's framing her?" Jack nodded. "Looks like it. And if she ever talks, she takes the fall. Smart, cold, the kind of setup that ends with her in prison and him walking free." I leaned back in the booth, trying to steady my breathing. The coffee between us went cold. "So she wasn't just cheating on me," I said quietly. "She was being used." Jack shrugged. "Maybe, or maybe she thought she was using him and got outplayed. Either way, she's not in control anymore." For the first time in months, I didn't feel anger. I felt something worse, confusion. If Emily wasn't the one orchestrating this, then what the hell was Daniel planning? Jack gave me a look I'd come to recognize, the kind he gave right before saying something I didn't want to hear. "You know what I think," he said. "I think Daniel's about to disappear. And he's making sure she takes the hit when he does." The thought hit like a punch. I pictured Emily, pale, shaking, whispering lies she thought would save her, and realized she wasn't acting. She was drowning. But then another thought followed, darker, sharper. Why should I save her? She'd still lied, still broken me, still driven me to this point. But if Daniel thought he could destroy her, then maybe I could destroy him. I looked at Jack. "Can you find him?" He smirked. "Already working on it." That afternoon, I went home to find Emily sitting on the couch, eyes red, clutching her phone like it was her only lifeline. She didn't even look up when I walked in. "I know you told her," she said softly. "Daniel's wife. She called me." I didn't respond. She said, "You sent her the photo. You think I don't deserve this, don't you?" Her voice cracked on the last word. I wanted to say yes, that she deserved every ounce of it. But the truth was twisting inside me now. I couldn't be sure of anything. "Instead," I said, "Daniel's using you." "Emily," her head snapped up. "What?" I tossed the flash drive onto the table. "He forged your signature. He's been moving money through your accounts. The moment this comes out, it won't just be an affair. It'll be fraud. And you'll be the only one left holding the bag." She stared at me, disbelief melting into something close to terror. "You're lying," she whispered. "Open it," I said. "See for yourself." She hesitated, then plugged it into her laptop. As the files loaded, I watched her face crumble. All color drained from her cheeks. Her breathing went shallow. "No, no, this can't be real." Her voice was barely audible. "He told me it was just for a client. He said it was temporary." "Yeah," I said bitterly. "Temporary until you're behind bars." Tears filled her eyes. For the first time, they didn't look like manipulation. They looked like pure fear. "John," she whispered, reaching for me. "Please, you have to believe me." I didn't know. I stepped back. "Belief isn't really my thing anymore." She broke down completely, her sobs echoing through the house we'd once called home. And yet, beneath the sadness, a small voice in my head whispered that maybe this, her pain, her collapse, wasn't enough. Maybe Daniel deserved worse. Maybe they both did. I didn't sleep that night either. I sat in my car outside Daniel's office until dawn, watching his building light up, one floor at a time. The city woke around me, oblivious to the storm about to hit, because I'd made a decision. If Daniel had built the trap, I'd be the one to spring it. But this time, it wouldn't just be about exposing the truth. It would be about ruin. I had always imagined revenge as a single dramatic moment, a scream, a confrontation, a scene that leaves no doubt. What I learned is that ruin is quieter. It arrives as a series of small inevitabilities that, when stacked correctly, become unstoppable. The morning after I decided to change the target, I sat with Jack until dawn while he ran checks on Daniel's shell companies. He moved through databases with the bored efficiency of a man who'd seen too much greed. "He's sloppy where it counts," Jack said finally. "Some transactions are routed through vendors that don't exist. Others are disguised as consulting fees. If anyone authorized a deep audit, they'd find the trail. That was the horn I needed to sound. Phase 1. Credibility. I couldn't just hand a flash drive to a blogger and expect a city to collapse. Institutions respond to risk. I started at the top, compliance, HR, the CEO's office. I walked into the corporate headquarters with a calm that had nothing to do with how my hands were shaking. I left a sealed envelope on the CEO's desk and a voicemail that said nothing dramatic, only, "There are documents in your inbox that deserve a look." "It's a liability," they called back within the hour. Phase 2. Amplification. Once the company's internal gears started grinding, I needed pressure from outside. I fed the journalist the dossier, the one who didn't like sensationalism, but loved a paper trail. He asked questions that forced action. Within 24 hours, the company announced a formal review. Daniel's calendar filled with meetings. His composure began to erode. Phase 3. Collapse vectors. I identified weak points: the bank that processed the transfers, the vendor accounts that received the funds, the CFO who had been friendly with Daniel. I called the bank's fraud department under the guise of a concerned client and pointed them to specific suspicious transactions, then to the CFO with a confidential note about compliance risk. I didn't accuse. I informed. Institutions hate being surprised. They move swiftly to cover their risk. Meanwhile, I let rumor do its slow work among people who once offered Daniel a toast. The friend who'd always laughed at his jokes now looked at him like a stranger. The investors who once nodded when he spoke began to ask for audited statements. Pressure is a contagious thing. It spreads faster than loyalty. Daniel started to make mistakes. Panic makes people sloppy. He rerouted funds with clumsy transfers. He called vendors at midnight and hissed orders. Jack recorded a phone call where Daniel barked at a subordinate to wipe the ledger, an instruction that, ironically, created a paper trail because the subordinate copied the files before deleting them. Little probes, little errors, every one of them a nail driven into the coffin. Tonight's before the board meeting I'd arranged to coincide with the press release. Daniel came to our street at 2 a.m. I watched from the car as he paced like a trapped animal, hands on his head. He walked right past my neighbor's mailbox where I'd already slipped a copy of the audit summary. He didn't see it. He was already blind with fear. The board meeting was clinical. I watched from the wings as the CEO read the first lines aloud. "We have identified irregularities that require immediate forensic accounting." Daniel's face went white. He had practiced the look of calm for camera interviews. Calm deserted him in the fluorescent light of that room. The questions came fast. Where do these payments go? Who authorized the invoices? The CFO, sweating, admitted that he'd noticed oddities and that they'd launched a deep review. You could feel the theater of control collapsing. When the forensic accountants served the subpoena, it was as precise as a scalpel. They didn't shout. They didn't create scenes. They asked for servers, logs, signed invoices. Daniel reached for his phone, then realized every backup had been mirrored by IT after an earlier anonymous tip, a tip I had the luxury to supply through a throwaway account. His voice broke when asked to explain a set of transfers that routed through a shell company tied to his friend Oliver. He stumbled over names until one of the executives quietly said, "We'll have counsel handle this." It was not an arrest. Not yet, but it was worse for him: containment. Men who build empires on appearances know how to survive storms, but their structures are fragile under legal light. Daniel tried to bargain, calling in favors, promising to make this all go away. The calls were futile. The deals he'd made were papered and time-stamped. The bank compliance officer fed the records to an investigator who was allergic to gray zones. The real collapse happened in public, but again, not with melodrama. A small headline surfaced: "Consultant under internal review after forensic audit." Social media did the rest. Clients withdrew. Partners avoided dinner invitations. Daniel called me once, voice ragged and low. "You don't know what you've started," he said. "I do," I replied. "And you deserve it." After that, he tried to flee, an abrupt ticket booked under a false name, a hastily packed bag. Jack intercepted him at the airport, long enough for investigators to place a hold. They asked him questions he couldn't answer. The shell companies were scraped clean, but the backup survived. They painted a clear picture. There were no dramatic cuffs on my street that week. There was instead the sterile, inescapable gravity of paperwork and procedure. Daniel was escorted in for questioning. His freedom was replaced by a constant legal shadow. When the arrest finally came a week later, it felt anticlimactic somehow. A man led past reporters, hands cuffed, the cardboard smile turned to dust. He looked at me once, through the crowd, and there was nothing there but a reflection of what he'd become, a small man swallowed by the scale of his own lies. I felt nothing when they took him. Not victory, not glee. A soft, hollow relief, like clearing a fever. Someone had been hurt, yes. People would say I'd ruined lives for revenge. They wouldn't see that I had also been ruined, in a way I'd accepted as the price for truth, but the snare had done its work. The man who'd used my wife as a ledger, as leverage, and as a lure was gone. The network he'd relied on had begun to unravel publicly, and in the quiet spaces he left behind, I began to see the shape of what might come next, decisions, consequences. A life rebuilt from the ruins, yet even as I closed one chapter, a nagging thought remained. Ruin lands unevenly. Some people get the headlines, others get the fallout. I had exposed a pattern, but I had also lit a fuse under people whose names were still unread. There would be more calls, more files, and perhaps more ruin to come. For now, though, the snare had tightened and the prey had been trapped. The next act would be tending the damage and deciding how much mercy, if any, I had left to give. When the dust settled, the city forgot Daniel faster than I expected. That's how scandal works, it burns bright, then vanishes, leaving only ash in the corners no one bothers to sweep. Headlines moved on to fresher prey. The company quietly replaced executives, and within a few months, his name became a whispered cautionary tale told in glass offices. But for me, the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was a vacuum, too quiet, too still, as if the air itself refused to move. I'd built my revenge like an architect builds a monument, stone by careful stone, but once it stood complete, I had nothing left to construct. Lena moved out 2 weeks after Daniel's arrest. She didn't say goodbye. A note on the counter read, "I can't live in the ruins of what we built." I read it once, folded it, and threw it away. There was no anger left, only the echo of what anger had already consumed. I tried to fill the silence with work, with rebuilding routines, with the kind of order people mistake for healing. But healing isn't order. It's chaos that refuses to kill you. Every night, I replayed the moment when I could have stopped, when I could have chosen to let go instead of follow the path all the way to the end. But I hadn't, and the truth was, I didn't regret it. Jack met me at a bar one evening, the kind of place where light fades into cigarette smoke and time feels slippery. "You got what you wanted," he said. "No," I answered after a while. "I got what I deserved." He laughed softly, the kind of laugh that doesn't reach the eyes. Same thing. Sometimes, Daniel's trial was slow and public. Embezzlement, fraud, tax evasion, all tidy, predictable crimes that looked clean on paper, but had bled through lives in ways a court couldn't measure. He pled guilty to a few counts, bargained for leniency, but his career was done. The house, the car, the influence, all stripped piece by piece until he was nothing more than a name on an indictment. Lena testified once. She cried on the stand. I didn't attend. Some wounds don't need witnesses. Months later, I received a letter from her. The handwriting was familiar, the kind that trembles on the first few lines, but steadies halfway through. It said, "You wanted him to pay. He did. But I can't tell if that makes either of us free. I hope one day you stop chasing ghosts." There was no return address. For the first time in years, I went to the sea. Just stood there, watching the horizon blur into a gray line that promised nothing. The waves didn't care who I was or what I'd done. They rose, they broke, they erased. I thought about throwing the letter into the tide, but I kept it instead, a reminder that some stories never end clean. In the end, revenge didn't give me closure. It gave me clarity. It showed me what people become when trust dies. Not monsters, but survivors who mistake pain for purpose. I had dismantled a man who destroyed others for profit. But in doing so, I dismantled myself too. Some nights, I still see Daniel's face in the blur of strangers, not as an enemy, but as a mirror of what obsession costs. And in those moments, I understand that revenge isn't about winning. It's about endurance, the slow, quiet survival after you've set fire to everything you once loved. The storm was over. The silence that followed was mine to live with. And somewhere, deep down, I knew I had finally become the thing I feared most, someone who could destroy another person and sleep through the night.